the difference between learning and practicing a language? Well, if we look at learning a language, usually we think of this more as the beginning stages of acquiring a language, right? So of the basic levels, we look at like the A through C system, like A1, A2, B1, B2. That is mostly learning the language, and this is a lot of memorization, a little bit of fluency practice, but for the most part, like grammar and vocabulary and really learning those structures and practicing. Of course, we're practicing like all the way through, we're practicing from the very beginning, but it's a bit more of like learning at the very beginning stages if you think of it as learning in the sense of not so much being able to use it in practice. And then if we look at practice, so looking at practicing a language, well, practicing a language, of course, we can start doing at the very beginning. And honestly, anytime you're using the language, you are practicing it. Like, even if you're studying it at the very beginning, you are practicing the language. But it's more of a practice, like there's a shift from learning to practice at, I'd say, about the intermediate level. And once you get to that intermediate level where you have a lot of the basics down, or at least have began to learn them and practice them and are ready to start having conversations, using the language more in reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and really just having more practice, for lack of another word, having more usage of that language. And so really the difference is that you are always learning and practicing, right? And when you get to that intermediate stage, there's that shift to practicing, but you're also still learning. Even when you get to the advanced stage, proficient, even native languages, like we're still learning. But this is where there's a little bit of a disconnect for language learners and teachers, and sometimes we hear people say like, oh, finish learning the language, or I'm not going to start another language, I'm done with this one. Like, we're usually referring to that learning stage, which is the beginner and intermediate level, as learning, and then the later stage as somewhat of an already knowing the language, but really we are still learning. So yes, so to summarize, learning and practicing, learning is really what we think of in those foundational levels, and practicing is all the way throughout our language learning journey, just like I am doing with each of my languages, with my Spanish, my Mandarin, my French, my English even. All of those are in the practicing and learning stages, but I tend to focus a little bit more on the learning aspect of, say, Mandarin, and less of the practice, like I do with my French, which now is shifting from a bit more of the practice away from the learning, even though, again, still learning. It's a bit more of how can I use this language, how can I get more reading, writing, speaking, listening in, and whereas my Mandarin is more of how can I just memorize these basics so that I've got something to work with, because I need just like foundations in order to practice that fluency. And then of course my Spanish and my English, they're very much at that practice stage. But then something interesting here actually is that as we get further and further into that practice stage, we tend to add a bit more of the learning in as well. Because we get to the point where, like for my Spanish for instance, where I'm able to use it well and use it in any context and speak and read and write, listen, everything like that. And now I'm looking at how can I improve even more, what can I learn, like how can I learn different grammatical concepts and different structures, different things, like different vocabulary, and that it's a bit of the learning, and then taking that and putting it back into practice. So you're never done with either one of these, learning or practicing, and really the key is just to have a focus and just to keep going the entire time and know that it's going to shift. Sometimes you're going to be more focused on the learning side, the studying, memorization, just getting, things that you need to know in order to use the language. And then other times that focus will shift into practice. And then all that means is that you are focusing more time on applying what you know. And then, and then later you'll need to add back in some more of the learning. So it's a constant balance. And there's always going to be a little bit of each one, but we will tend to focus on one more than the other in most circumstances. And yes, that is my perspective on practice and learning and how they compare and how we use them in language learning. I'll see you guys back here in the next video. Bye guys!